YOUCANIC, where we publish videos and how-to guides of how to maintain and fix your vehicle.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about hybrids. Here we have a 2010 Mercedes-Benz S400 hybrid. Right there is a 2011 Hyundai Sonata hybrid. So we're going to talk a little bit about these cars. So this though, as you can see, this vehicle has come all the way from California. This is actually somebody who owns this vehicle. They shipped it to us so that we can fix and figure out what's wrong with it and fix this vehicle. So that should give you a little bit of an idea where we're headed here, because somebody shipping a vehicle from the West Coast to East Coast, from California all the way to Maryland, for somebody to fix it, it should kind of raise a red flag, especially if you are looking to buy a hybrid vehicle. Now, Brian, are we just trying to tell people to not buy hybrids, or electric is not the way of the future?
No. Electric is the way of the future, and that is where it's going. And when the technology gets there, it'll be great. This technology was first proprietary, essentially, and it's not completely got all those bugs worked out.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing a lot, where the manufacturers, what's happening is that these modules are coded to a specific vehicle. I mean, it does make sense, that ignition and certain components that are, important for anti-theft to be coded to the vehicle. But what we're seeing is that every single part that's, even things like that shouldn't really matter. You should be able to pull from another used vehicle and install it on this without doing much coding. Even parts like that are requiring programming and coding that you can only do with the dealerships. So one question we get a lot of times is that people who own a hybrid, their cars, if there's an issue with it, be that power electronic module, hybrid battery, sometimes even the AC compressor is part of the high voltage system, even that can fail and then prevent your car from starting. So we get a question a lot. It's like, can I just use the starter? That car has a 3.5 liter engine that has a 2.2. It's can I just use the engine and not use the hybrid system? What would you say to that, Brian?
That would be great, but the point is, this car doesn't have a starter as well as this one. It's not built with a starter. It's built with this engine control module. No?
Power electronic module.
This power electronic module, a component that bolts right to the side of the motor, that also powers it's part of a flywheel between the electric motor, right? Okay, so there's a power electronic module on this vehicle there's not a starter, that's bolted to the side of the motor or the side of the transmission that will turn an electric motor with the high voltage to start the engine. So there's not a starter built into it. So you can't just say, put a starter in it, because it's not even built that way.
Yeah.
And also, because it was made with an electric drive like this, you can't delete it, or you're not meeting the proper emissions that was designed for that car.
One thing that I would say that can help a little bit make this system last longer is if the vehicle has start-stop, you can basically turn that off so the engine doesn't stop every time you stop at a light. Because when you stop at a light, engine shuts off. Then as soon as you start to go, the hybrid system has to kick back in, and then what it will do is go start the engine. But the more uses you get, the more that you're using the hybrid system, the higher goes the risk of that failing. It can wear out.
Well, what happens with the start-stop feature is just like, so there's there's a few other computer boards in here, but the two number one, this one here is number one that will go bad, and the contacts will burn inside of it because it gets too hot. But that's because every time you start and stop feature, you're drawing the current through here. instead of just the one time you start the car, you drive it and then you turn it off when you go. But if you're going through the city or you're making like a 3-point turn, you've used 5 start-stop features in. So you're making this get really hot, and then this sits on top of it in a fashion, and so all that heat's going to go up and it's going to burn these circuits up also. And when either of these, one or the other, go bad, or sometimes both of them, then the whole car is basically disabled. And you can take it in and get it diagnosed, but...
Yeah, and speaking of that diagnosis, we've had a few cases where somebody reaches out to us, contacts us after they've spent $1,000 or $1,500 on diagnostics, because a shop will start taking this apart to figure out what's wrong with it, or taking other components of the hybrid system apart. The thing about this hybrid system is that it's not like the mechanical, and there's not much mechanical parts. There are moving parts that you can just take apart and see. Here, sure, you can see that this is burned if you take this all apart, but you don't even need to do that. If you have somebody who has experience with these vehicles, all they need to do is read the codes, and the codes will usually point them to the right part, and then you just don't even need to. So I would say that if you have a vehicle that you have it at a and this is not uncommon though, because we're seeing this happen even at dealerships a couple of times where a car spends weeks and weeks there because they just they're doing diagnostics on it. You want to be aware before you take one of these cars into a shop and ask and say how much it's going to be to diagnose this, because if they're spending 10 hours to figure it out, you shouldn't be paying for 10 hours of diagnostic. You have to find somebody who knows them, and that is where the problem is with these hybrids, is that there's not a lot of people. And we're heading this way with these vehicles. The same thing with electric cars. We're heading, it's the way of the future, and there's nothing wrong with it, but the repair information, mechanics are not electricians, they're not programmers. I mean, with these cars, you almost need to be a programmer to figure them out, more than you need to be a mechanic. So that's something to keep in mind. One thing I want to point out though is, let's take this car, got shipped away from California. You'd say why would somebody do that? Well, in this vehicle, the power electronic module that is right here failed. And that repair at a dealership will cost between $10,000 to $12,000. Now, that is a very expensive repair. What happens though, and we've seen this twice already, is that sometimes when the power electronic module fails, the car sits for a long time, because it's usually what happens is it goes from shop to shop until somebody figures out what's wrong with it. But it could be weeks. In most cases, it ends up being months for the car to sit. And during that time, the hybrid battery could discharge. We have one that came here that after we read the codes, this was defective. We replaced that, but then the hybrid battery was to discharge, was below 28%, and at that point, that will not start. Even if everything else is fine in the hybrid system, the car will not start because there's no power from the high voltage battery to start the engine. Luckily, we were able to figure out how to charge that battery and bring that back to 38% so that we could the car would start. But keep in mind that sometimes it's, like I said, in 2 cases, we had another case where this part was replaced, and then the mechanic told them, well, now the hybrid battery needs to be replaced as well. One thing is that the status of the battery can be usually checked before you even do anything else. So we strongly recommend somebody to not only look at your codes, but also inspect and check the health of the hybrid battery, so they don't go and replace, do a repair that's thousands of dollars, and then tell them that they need something else.
Well, and also you're going to have somebody with knowledge with a good scanner. It's got to be a scanner that can scan all the modules in your vehicle. It can't just be just a check engine scanning to be able to diagnose this stuff, because you're reading power control or power electronic module and the BMS that's built into this battery.
Yeah.
So.
One thing that we're seeing, so these hybrid batteries, and they all do this, they have inside a cycle. It's really, it's called contractors, but a contractor is almost like a switch, like a light switch. And every time the system needs to be used, that switch turns on and then the system is powered up. One of the reasons why they use that is for safety reasons, because when you turn off the ignition, that switch turns off, like you turning off the lights. But there's a second reason why that's done, and that is to keep a count of how many times the battery has used. So on the BMS, which is inside here, the battery management system, keeps track of how many times you basically use the hybrid battery, how many times you turn on and off that switch. On this one, for example, and again, this is a Mercedes hybrid battery, but other manufacturers do the same thing. They have a counter that starts at 200,000 cycles. So basically, if you use your light switch 200,000, and then that counter starts to go down. We had a vehicle with less than 70,000 miles where that cycle, that contractor switch had reached zero. Once it reaches zero, that battery completely shuts down and then it's not usable anymore. You can see these are not designed to be open and repaired. I wish they were though, because then there's things that you could do. You can change, replace cells and things like that. So Brian, tell us a little bit how safe it is to work on this hybrid system.
Well, it can be just as safe as anything else, but you need to start with it, to work on it. You need to understand that this is a high voltage system. This isn't your standard, I mean, it's also not your standard 120 volts versus this is DC voltage, right? That can really cause, you can cause yourself very much physical harm, fire, or even death, right? So you need to learn and know how to de-energize the stuff properly and not touch anything while you're doing that, you know, by disconnecting the batteries, disconnecting the lines, you know, grounding them out so that everything has been discharged.
And locking that.
And do the lockout, tag out,
Yeah.
is what they would call it. And then, you know, that way you can work on it. Once that's all been discharged, I mean, you're essentially, I mean, it's just like anything else. You unbolt stuff and bolt things back on where they need to go. Make sure that you've connected everything the way it's supposed to, so that when you do hook the power back up, you didn't short anything,
right,
and cause other issues. So, I mean, there's a lot to be known about it, but this is the way it's going, which is totally fine. It's just that, you know, not everybody is comfortable doing it or has the knowledge that they need to be able to replace these pieces.
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of people who see the content on how to, they reach out to their mechanics, or their hybrid doesn't start, so they go reach out to mechanics, and a lot of them turn them down because they don't have the experience with working on the hybrid system. And so it's going to take, if you got an older hybrid, you got to keep in mind that it can get expensive to repair it. I mean, in some cases, the repairs, if this fails and that fails at the same time, you look at $10,000 to $12,000 on this, another 15 on that. But even if you do that using used parts, you're looking at several $1,000s of repair if something fails.
Well, and like you were saying earlier, like somebody will get this diagnosed, and if this is $12,000, $10,000 to $12,000, not everybody's just got that to pull out of their pocket.
Yeah.
So that's why this sits for a while. And then as this sits, or as the car sits, this battery decharges.
Yeah.
And so then then when you come back, hey, I've got the money to pay for this, well then this has gone down too low, where you can't charge it, can't use it. So now you gotta come up with another 15 on a car that's 10 years old.
Yeah, that's why these days we're seeing cars that are hybrid, they're pretty inexpensive, but it's because if that hybrid system fails, it could cost more than what the car is worth to repair that. So it's one of the main reasons why we wanted to put together this video, and to educate people, not that you need to avoid these, because a lot of times you can get a lot for your money, but you just be aware that the hybrid system can be expensive to maintain and repair. And a lot of times there's things that you won't be able to do on your own. Thank you for watching. YOUCANIC.
Where you can be the mechanic.